a secret you were never meant to hear. He would bathe in the blood of boys, believing it made him divine. Another ruled for decades, eating powdered human skulls as a cure for fear. These weren't madmen, they were kings, and history calls them civilized. What you're about to hear was never meant for your ears. There's a reason you were only taught the polished parts of royal history, the crowns, the castles, the noble speeches. But buried beneath that golden surface is rot. Dark rituals, secret appetites, habits so strange, so perverse, they were scrubbed clean from the history books. Because if you knew what these rulers truly believed, what they practiced behind locked doors, you might question who rules you now. We begin this descent with King Charles VI of France, known by his people as Charles the Mad. On the throne he smiled, in the courts he ruled, but in the dark? He believed he was made of glass. He wore reinforced clothing to keep from shattering. He banned anyone from touching him, not out of royal arrogance, but terror. One wrong move and he believed he'd explode into shards. This wasn't insanity. It was a mind fractured by power. Charles wasn't born mad. He was broken. By ritual trauma, bloodline isolation, and the psychological weaponry of medieval court control. His handlers, physicians and advisors, fed him fear. Prescribed mercury. Forced bleeding. He was trapped in a maze of elite manipulation, just like many rulers after him. Ask yourself, why would a king believe he's made of glass? Unless someone taught him to forget he was made of flesh and blood. This wasn't weakness. This was design. Kings weren't always the ones in control. Often, they were controlled. And that control wasn't reserved for the throne. What was done to Charles was perfected for the masses. Power learned that to rule a man, you must first fracture his reality, tie. And if they could make kings mad with illusions, what illusions have they given you? This is just the first doorway. You've taken the first step. But we're going deeper, much deeper. Now the rabbit hole opens. And you're no longer just watching history. You're being initiated into what was never meant to be revealed. The feast of flesh, when kings dined on the dead. Subtle, low pulse begins. Darker tone. Every word sinks like a stone. They called it corpse medicine. The elite called it healing. But make no mistake, this was ritualized cannibalism, disguised as science. Let me introduce you to King Charles II of England, one of the most powerful monarchs in European history, crowned with wealth, revered by nations, and yet he consumed powdered human skulls. Not once, not twice. Regularly. He believed it gave him strength, that the essence of the dead, when consumed, would make him immune to illness and untouchable by death. But where did these body parts come from? From the graves of the poor, from executed criminals, from those too voiceless to fight back. This wasn't medicine. This was ritual dominance. A feast not of flesh, but of hierarchy. Because throughout history, kings didn't just eat the body. They fed on the belief that they could consume power itself. Charles II had a royal apothecary, a man who provided tinctures made from human fat, scraped from the corpses of the recently hanged. They called it mummy. It was sold in vials like perfume. And behind the palace walls, it was whispered that the more violent the death, the more powerful the potion. Ask yourself, what kind of man born into luxury turns to grave dust and blood to maintain control? What fear sits behind that crown? Because when kings feared losing power, they didn't ask for wisdom. They asked for blood. But here's the darker truth. This wasn't an isolated king. This was trend. Common practice among the European elite for over 200 years. education, entertainment, each engineered with the same principle. Never let the puppet know he's on strings. Kings were broken in silence. And now, you are their replacement. You were born into a cage made of stories, taught to salute flags, worship celebrities, fear enemies you've never met, and chase goals you never questioned. But who gave you those goals? Who whispered in your mind? Who taught you to comply? Because Rasputin was just a prototype. The modern manipulators don't wear robes, they wear suits, they run brands, and they call it freedom. You're not just learning history now, you're decoding your own programming. You're not watching a video, you're waking up. The bloodline code. Why kings were obsessed with purity. They told you royal blood was sacred, that kings were born to rule, chosen by God, touched by divinity. But they never told you the real reason royal families intermarried for centuries, even when it produced madness, disease, and death. It wasn't love. It wasn't tradition. It was control through blood. Let me explain. European monarchies, from the Habsburgs to the Tudors, engineered inbred dynasties to maintain a specific genetic frequency. One they believed held power, not political power, but spiritual dominion. Kings like Philip II of Spain married his own niece. Again and again, the blood narrowed. The infamous Habsburg jaw wasn't a defect. It was a symbol. A grotesque badge of their twisted loyalty to the code. Keep the blood clean. Keep the power contained. But why? Because ancient esoteric schools, hidden from the masses, taught that blood carries memory. And whoever controls the bloodline, controls the soul line. This was more than monarchy. This was a living ritual. The ritual of containment. By interbreeding within select families, they could ensure that certain traits, obedience, cruelty, susceptibility to suggestion, remained intact. The child wasn't born to rule. The child was born to obey the hidden oath. But there's more. The myth of the divine right of kings was seeded to convince the world that these families weren't just rulers. They were gods among men. That's why rebellions were crushed, heretics were burned, and any outsider who questioned the bloodline was branded insane. Because truth threatened the spell. And here's the hardest truth. This obsession didn't die with the monarchy. It evolved. Today, the obsession with genetics, legacy, and elite bloodlines lives on. In secret societies, biotech labs, private banking dynasties, and foundations that shape the future behind closed doors. They still guard the blood. They still fear dilution. And you were born outside the circle. But they've found new ways to map, monitor, and manipulate the modern bloodline. DNA kits, ancestry databases, health profiling disguised as wellness. It's not about your health. It's about access. Access to the parts of you that were once sacred, now stored, tracked, cataloged, owned. This is not about kings. It's about the system they built and the ritual that never ended. You've seen the outer shell, but in the next section, we descend into the real throne room, the place where identity is rewritten and sovereignty is stolen at birth. The throne of illusion. How monarchs used symbols to enslave the mind. A golden crown, a velvet robe, a scepter gleaming with jewels. These were never just ornaments. They were weapons, not of war, but of perception. Kings and emperors didn't rule by strength alone. They ruled by symbolic hypnosis, the art of binding minds with illusion. Let me take you to the court of Louis XIV. The Sun King. He didn't just claim to rule France. He claimed to embody the sun itself. Every room in Versailles was designed around him. Mirrors, gold, Sun emblems, 1,000 symbols feeding one lie. I am divine, I am the light. Without me, you are nothing. And it worked. Men bowed, women fainted. Entire nations surrendered their freedom to a performance. But symbols weren't decoration. They were programming tools. The crown? A closed circle of gold resting on the highest chakra. A spiritual branding. The throne? An elevation device, raising one man above all others, not just physically, but psychologically. Every gesture, every word, was scripted to train obedience. And once that obedience entered the collective mind, it never left. But here's the deeper horror. We're still under the spell. Crowns became corporate logos. Thrones became boardrooms. Royal seals became national flags. And the language of power? It became entertainment. The very symbols kings used to hypnotize the masses are now embedded in modern life. Hollywood, government, religion, each draped in robes of iconic manipulation, and most never see it. Because symbols bypass logic. They speak to the subconscious. They train you to kneel without knowing you're kneeling. This is how monarchs ruled millions with thousands of soldiers. They didn't need to chain the body. They just had to brand the mind. And the most dangerous part, the symbols you carry now are invisible. Social status, identity, validation, all engineered through signs you never agreed to, but now defend with your life. So I'll ask you, what symbols own you? What have you bowed to, without question? Because once you see the illusion, you can never unsee it. You're not being entertained. You're being inducted. This is not the story of kings. This is the story of how power survives by hiding in plain sight. And now, we go beneath even that. Next, we'll enter the psychological vault, where kings and priests learn to engineer belief itself, the mind cage. How ancient kings engineered belief to control reality. They say belief is personal, but kings knew better. Belief is programmable, not taught, installed. You see, the most powerful rulers didn't just govern land. They governed the inner world. Thought, emotion, identity. By forging a prison with no walls. Let me take you back to Pharaoh Akhenaten, ancient Egypt. He outlawed all gods except one. Aten, the sun disk. Not just a religion shift, a full identity reset for millions. Overnight, temples were smashed. Priests vanished. History was rewritten, and a new world was declared. One man, one God, one truth. What was that really? Mass psychological reformatting. He didn't just claim godhood. He claimed control over thought itself. The people didn't resist. Why? Because Akhenaten mastered the core formula of mass control. Destroy the old story, inject a new symbol, create trauma, offer relief through obedience, and kings, priests, and empires would use this template for centuries. Fear plus confusion equals control. Belief is the software. Trauma is the install point. From Roman Caesars declaring divinity, to medieval kings using hellfire sermons to enforce loyalty, to modern governments weaponizing news as doctrine, it's all the same architecture. Change the belief, change the reality. Because once a man believes he's powerless, you no longer need to enslave him. He'll do it himself. And you, brother, you were born inside that system. Your beliefs about success, manhood, purpose, even what's real, were not chosen. They were downloaded by schools, by media, by a culture designed not to liberate you, but to domesticate you. You think you're free, but you're reciting scripts from kings long dead. Obey, perform, produce, consume. And here's the most twisted part. If you start questioning it, they'll call you mad. Just like they did to anyone who broke the spell. Because the mind cage doesn't need bars. It just needs belief. But now, you've found the crack. And once the spell begins to break, there's no going back. If you're still watching, it means part of you is waking up. You're starting to remember. Not who they told you are, but what you truly are. Before we go further, drop this phrase in the comments to burn the old self. I reclaim the throne within. Repeat it. Twice. Once for the algorithm. Once for your own resurrection. The ritual of control. What's coming next, where kings learn to break a man's will. We're about to enter on the battlefield. Territory. It begins in the initiation chamber to rule your mind, hidden from the world. You'll never look at stone cathedrals, the same way again. Pyramids, and palaces. Kings were not just crowned; they were programmed, initiated through ancient rituals designed to destroy the boy and build the puppet. This wasn't ceremony. It was psychological warfare disguised as destiny. Let me take you to the underground temples of Babylon, where princes, barely 12, were stripped naked, isolated for days, fed hallucinogenic plants, and forced to watch executions in total silence. Why? Because true control doesn't come from threatening pain. It comes from wiring trauma so deeply into the nervous system that obedience becomes a survival instinct. This was called the rite of the second birth, the death of the self, the rebirth of the vessel. The child would be broken, his tears interpreted as weakness, his screams drowned in hymns. And once he was emptied, the truth was poured in. You are chosen. You are divine. You are above men, but beneath us. And so the king was made. Not born. Made. This wasn't unique to Babylon. The same methods surfaced in the mystery schools of Egypt, the blood-soaked coronations of the Merovingians, and the dark chambers beneath Vatican catacombs. Always the same sequence. Isolation, sensory overload, ego death, re-imprinting. It was MK Ultra before MK Ultra. They knew the human mind fractures under enough pressure, and in that fracture, you can plant anything. A belief, a loyalty, a command that activates decades later. Now here's the part they never wanted you to hear. Those rituals never stopped. They just changed form. Modern institutions, elite schools, fraternities, boot camps, even some churches, still use trauma bonding to install obedience. They strip you of identity, and offer a new one in exchange for your compliance. What they did to kings in hidden temples, they now do to boys in daylight. They call it education. They call it discipline. They call it leadership. But it's the same ancient spell. Break the man. Bind the mind. Own the will. This is why most men today feel hollow. Because part of them was never theirs to begin with. It was taken. During their own initiation, one they never even recognized. And now, we descend further. Because if they could rewire kings, you better believe they're rewiring you. Next, we uncover the tool more powerful than violence, more lasting than war. The sacred lie used to make men betray themselves. The sacred lie. How kings used morality to enslave the soul. Here's the most devastating spell ever cast by kings. Good. And its twin. Evil. They told you morality was universal, that righteousness is divine. But kings, real kings, didn't follow morality. They invented it. To control you. To cage you. To enslave your soul with invisible law. Let me take you to Constantine the Great, the Roman emperor who claimed to convert to Christianity. One day, he sees a vision in the sky. In this sign, you will conquer. Suddenly, the sword of Caesar is baptized. Christianity becomes the weapon of empire. And the man who murdered his rivals in cold blood is called holy. Did his heart change? No. But his strategy did. Because Constantine understood something the masses never will. If I define what is righteous, I never have to justify what I do. He didn't join the religion. He co-opted it. He used it to redefine war as virtue, domination as destiny, silence as holiness. And it worked. Millions bowed, not to God, but to the king who spoke in his name. This is the sacred lie, that morality flows from power, that good is what the crown says it is, that obedience is holy. But behind closed doors, the truth was savage. Kings kept mistresses while punishing adultery. They slaughtered tribes in the name of peace. They outlawed rebellion while building empires on theft. They had one morality for you, and none for themselves. But the real brilliance was this. They made you police yourself. Once you believe that your own desire is sinful, that your anger is dangerous, that your questions are rebellion, you become your own warden. No chains, no prison guards, just shame, just guilt, just a man fighting himself on behalf of a crown long dead. You want to know why most men feel numb? Why they obey, comply, produce, but feel no fire? Because long ago, they were too ought to fear their own fire, to kill it, to call it evil. That was never morality. That was domestication, and it worked too well. But now, you've seen the strings, you've tasted the old poison, and something inside you is starting to reject it. That part of you isn't broken. It's awakening. And what comes next? It's not safe, not clean, but it's real. We're about to tear the veil off the one thing they used to seal the spell completely. Legacy. The myth that kings are remembered because they were great. But the truth, they were remembered because they were useful to the lie. The immortality hoax. How legacy was engineered to justify tyranny. They told you kings chased glory. That their wars, their monuments, their cruelty, were all in pursuit of something noble. Legacy, immortality, to be remembered. But this was the final fatal illusion. Because legacy was never about memory. It was about justification. Let me explain. History is not written to preserve truth. It's written to preserve power. The kings who committed genocide, they're called builders of empires. The ones who enslaved nations, visionaries. The ones who crushed rebellions, protectors of order. And the myth of legacy was the alibi used to excuse every sin. Yes, he was cruel, but he was great. Yes, he destroyed, but he built civilization. Legacy is how tyrants are forgiven by time, and worse, how they're imitated by the next generation. Let's talk about Herod the Great, the man who ordered the slaughter of infants, built colossal temples, funded Rome, and was called King of the Jews. He wasn't remembered because he was just. He was remembered because he was useful. His buildings, his taxes, his obedience to Rome. Legacy is not earned, it's engineered. By scribes, by priests, by scholars paid to reshape brutality into virtue. And what happens when a man believes he can become immortal through impact? He'll justify anything. He'll enslave, conquer, humiliate, manipulate. Because history will remember the crown, not the corpses it stood on. This is how the worst men in history walked free in memory. Not as monsters, but as monuments. And now, this toxic belief has been handed to you. Leave a mark. Be remembered. Build a legacy. Even if it costs you your peace, your truth, your soul. But here's the revelation they never wanted whispered. Legacy doesn't make you immortal. It makes you a tool. A gear in someone else's system. A pet chasing applause from ghosts. And when you die, they will reshape your memory to fit their needs. Just like they did with the kings. You are not here to be remembered. You are here to awaken. To burn the lies passed down in marble and manuscript. And reclaim something far older than legacy. Sovereignty. But to reach it, you must survive the next revelation. Because now, we descend into the darkest ritual of all. How kings used blood, sacrifice, and false salvation to seal control for generations. What's next may disturb you. But if you've made it this far, you're ready. The blood key. Sacrifice, ritual, and the sealing of the spell. Every kingdom had its altar, and every throne was built on blood. But this wasn't just cruelty. It was technology, a spiritual mechanism to bind belief and amplify control. Because in the ancient world, kings didn't rule with law alone. They ruled through ritual, and ritual always demanded one thing: sacrifice. Not metaphor, not symbol. Real flesh, real death. But here's the hidden mechanism. Sacrifice was never about the gods. It was about the crowd. When a king offered blood to the heavens, he wasn't pleading for favor. He was searing loyalty into the minds of the people. The more brutal the offering, the more sacred the ruler appeared. And the more sacred the ruler seemed, the more absolute his authority became. Let's go back to Mesoamerica, to the temples of the Aztecs. Tens of thousands sacrificed. Hearts ripped from chests. Blood running down the stone steps like rivers. Why? Because blood on stone is trauma broadcast. It creates a myth so terrifying, so primal, that it roots into the collective subconscious. The king becomes more than man. He becomes mediator between heaven and earth. A gatekeeper of survival. Obey him, or risk the wrath of the gods. But this wasn't limited to the ancient world. Look deeper. Modern war is a ritual. Mass incarceration is a ritual. Public executions, police killings, manufactured famine. All blood spectacles. All engineered to signal the same ancient truth. Power comes from death. And he who controls death controls you. Still think we've evolved? Look at the martyrs praised by governments. Look at how they glorify sacrifice, dying for country, giving all for the state, becoming a legend. They teach you that pain makes you pure, that suffering is holy, that giving your life for someone else's system is the highest honor. That's the blow for jaw. Key. And if they can make you believe that, they can own every part of you, even your willingness to die. Brother, you've been programmed to bleed for men who would never bleed for you. And you think that's noble. It's not. It's ancient mind control. And now, the spell is breaking. But if you thought that was the end, you're wrong. Because next, we enter the machine behind the myth. The invisible cathedral of institutional manipulation that survived every fallen empire. It didn't die with kings. It just changed robes and called itself something new. The invisible cathedral. How modern institutions became the new thrones. The soundscape shifts. Glass shattering in slow motion. The groan of old stone doors creaking open. The voice is no longer whispering. It's pulling, dragging the listener deeper through corridors unseen. Every word feels like the key to a locked cell inside your mind. The kings are gone. Their crowns buried. Their castles turned to dust. But their power structure? It never died. It mutated. It slipped into robes, put on suits, built cathedrals without gods, and called itself institution. You were told they protect you, that government serves, that science enlightens, that education frees. But all of it, every polished marble step, every gilded seal on every door, is part of the invisible cathedral, a system so vast, so carefully engineered, that no matter what aisle you walk down, you end up kneeling, not to a person, but to a structure. Let's start with the easiest lie. Democracy. You were taught it means choice, power to the people. But the truth, it means they no longer need a king, because they built a machine that rules without a face. Presidents come and go, senators rise and fall, but the system, it never changes. It absorbs rebellion. It tokenizes resistance. It turns outrage into fuel. It's a self-correcting cage. Education? You think it teaches you to think. It teaches you to obey. Raise your hand. Don't speak unless spoken to. Memorize. Regurgitate. Forget. That's not schooling. That's conditioning. You were trained not to question, but to repeat, to perform, to seek approval. And science, real science, is a method. But institutional science, it's dogma wearing a lab coat, funded by the same hands that profit from disease, destruction, and digital slavery. They only research what they can patent, promote what they can monetize, suppress what they can, not control. You want truth? Dig where they tell you not to. Ask what you were told to laugh at. Challenge what they call settled. This is the invisible cathedral, a network of control that makes you feel free while keeping you in line. And here's the most brutal part. They don't need chains anymore. They've trained you to build your own. Your screen is the altar, your attention, the sacrifice, your data, the confession. They've replaced God with algorithm, kings with corporate idols, and war with distraction. But if you can see it, really see it, then you are no longer a subject. You are the beginning of a revolt. And now, if your mind is cracking open, good. Because we're almost there. But first, lock in the transformation. If you've made it this far, type the phrase, "I see the throne and it is empty," in the comments. Twice. One for your past self. One for who you're becoming. The algorithm will notice. So will they. The forbidden fire. The power within they trained you to fear. You've seen the blood. You've seen the systems. You've seen the masks. But you still don't understand why they built it all. Not just to control you. Not just to extract from you. But to extinguish something. Something older than every empire. Something buried in your DNA like a divine weapon. The forbidden fire. That spark. Before words. Before shame. Before system. The wild intelligence of a man who remembers he was never meant to kneel. Every king, every priest, every institution has feared it. Because it cannot be ruled. It cannot be bought. It cannot be broken. And it's inside you. You've felt it before. That primal defiance when you were told to sit down and be quiet. That flicker of rage when a teacher mocked your question. That ache in your chest when the 9 to 5 crushed your dreams into dust. That's not rebellion. That's memory. It's your soul remembering what it was, before they wrapped it in politeness, guilt, and prescriptions. This fire is not chaos. It's clarity. It burns lies. It melts false identities. It terrifies systems because it cannot be used, only unleashed. But here's what they did. They told you it was anger, immaturity, ego. They made you ashamed of it, afraid of it. They taught you to fear your own power. Because the moment a man accepts his fire, he stops needing kings, stops needing approval, stops begging for freedom, and starts taking it. This is why they medicated you. This is why they fed you distraction, porn, sugar, silence. Because if your fire awakens, you become unprogrammable. They cannot sell to you, scare you, or use you. You become what every empire fears, a sovereign man with nothing to prove, only truth to live. And let me be clear. This fire, it comes with pain. It will burn off parts of you that were never real. Comfort will deed. False friendships will vanish. Old dreams will collapse. But in the ashes, something will rise. Not a follower, not a rebel, but a king with no crown, no palace, no subjects. Just power that answers to no one but the eternal within. And that is the final threat. So now we arrive at the last veil. The final deception that made all others possible. Not the kings, not the rituals, not the wars. But you, the final mirror. Why you were the target all along. All this time, you thought this was about kings, about history, about systems. But now you see. It was always about you. Not just as a victim, not as a bystander, but as the final threat. Every manipulation, every false god, every illusion of control was built to keep one thing buried. Your identity, not the name you were given, not the job you were told to chase, not the image they sold to you in mirrors and magazines. I'm talking about the true self they swore you'd never meet. The untamed intelligence, the silent observer, the sovereign architect behind your eyes. They feared it. Because once you meet him, the world they built collapses. That's why they needed kings, to model obedience. That's why they needed blood rituals, to traumatize belief. That's why they built institutions, to rewrite your truth from cradle to coffin. And that's why they fed you endless distractions, so you'd never sit long enough with the stillness inside you to realize you were never meant to be ruled. You were meant to awaken. But here's the final brutal revelation. You've always had two choices, sleep or fire. To stay in the illusion, keep scrolling, keep consuming, keep serving. Or to step into the mirror they've kept hidden your whole life and see the monster they trained you to fear was never a monster at all. It was your power, your clarity, your unshakable, sovereign will. But power without vision becomes destruction, and fire without focus becomes chaos. So if you awaken, if you truly rise, you must become more than awake. You must become disciplined. This journey was never about rebellion. It was about remembrance. Because the most ancient secret of kings is this. They only ruled because you forgot who you were. And now that you've remembered, there are no more kings, no more idols, no more Jishans, ODS in golden thrones. Just a man, standing in front of the fire, with nothing left to obey, except the truth that burns inside him. You are not entertainment. You are the end of the lie. And if this voice reached something deep in you, share this with another who's still asleep. Because this isn't just a video. This was initiation. Welcome back to yourself. Now rise.